This is the Lisl Auman story.
Lisl Auman had met Matthaeus Jaehnig only that morning. By day's end, he and a cop were dead, and her life was over. Freeze this image in your mind. It's the afternoon of November 12, 1997. Lisl Auman, 21 years old, is standing in front of a boxy condominium, part of a sprawling complex on Monaco Parkway in southeast Denver. Behind her is the hulking form of Matthaeus Jaehnig, struggling frantically with the lock on the condominium door. In front of Lisl are the first two, followed by 3 police officers. She has her hands up. She is taking 1 or 2 hesitant steps forward. In seconds, she will be on the ground, hands behind her for the handcuffs, an officer's knee in her back, his voice in her ear, yelling, calling her a bitch. She will be bundled into a police car and driven a short way off in the condo parking lot. Jaehnig, meanwhile, will have veered from the door around a set of stairs, coming within a few feet of the officers, and into an alcove. The alcove is roughly 15 feet long and blind. There is no exit from it other than the stairs he has just passed or the locked doorway to a second condo. Unaware of this, the 2 cops who first grabbed Auman run around the building in opposite directions, hoping to cut Jaehnig off. Officer Bruce VanderJagt arrives with his partner, Sergeant Dean Jones. VanderJagt is a courageous and much admired 11-year veteran of the Denver Police Department. He has twice received a Distinguished Service Cross, once for disarming a gunman terrorizing the employees of Porter Memorial Hospital, once for running into a burning building to help save the occupants. While Jones maneuvers for a cautious look into the alcove, VanderJagt peers around the corner. There's a fusillade of shots. More quickly than the mind can grasp, a bullet rips away the right side of VanderJagt's head. For long seconds, he remains standing. Then he falls. By now, dozens of police officers are on the scene. Bullets are flying in every direction, 20 or 30 of them from Jaehnig's SKS semi-automatic assault rifle, hundreds from police guns. Wood splinters into dust. Glass flies. 9 more bullets hit Officer VanderJagt's prone body. Some 200 penetrated the walls of the condo, many boring their way through and out the other side of the building. On the floor, Lisl's brown and white. Dog, Jean, named for a recently deceased grandfather, cowers in terror. An officer approaches the car where Auman is sitting. "You're going down for murder," he tells her according to her later testimony. "You're gonna go down." 3 hours later, Matthaeus Jaehnig, too, is dead of a single bullet that entered under his chin and ricocheted around his skull. Having run out of bullets, he had inched forward to steal BruceVanderJagt's revolver and then shot himself. DPD Sergeant John Priest is questioning Lisl Auman. Chief Deputy District Attorney Lamar Sims of the Denver District Attorney's Office is present. The interview is videotaped. With her face hidden by her hands, slumped forward on the table, Auman sobs violently. She's asked if her testimony has been coerced. "Well," she says, "the cop at the scene did threaten her. Does she feel coerced at the moment?" "No," she responds. Is she talking to them because of what the cop said to her? No. The interview proceeds. She is inert, passive, and a stubborn hulk of a girl droning on endlessly and tonelessly. Her basic story is that she went to Buffalo Creek with Matthaeus Jaehnig and another carload of his friends because she was breaking up with her boyfriend and wanted to retrieve her belongings from the lodge where they lived. What happened at the lodge is unclear, but as she and Jaehnig, whom she inexplicably calls Sardine, drove away, police began following. Jaehnig accelerated, weaving around cars, sometimes crossing the median, reaching speeds of up to 120 miles an hour. When they came to the city limits, Denver police took up the chase, finally cornering Auman and Jaehnig at the Monaco Place apartments. Lisl is evasive and vague about the names of her companions. She says that Jaehnig's red Trans Am was green. She spouts nonsense about a mystery man named Dave, who responds to her page whenever she needs help. She implies that Dave and Sardine belong to some menacing and shadowy group whose purpose she cannot define. The more she's pressed about this group, the fuzzier her answers. "These people don't let a lot known about them, and I probably wouldn't want to know a lot about them," she says. "I've seen movies like Reservoir Dogs, kind of like that." She is doubtless describing Jaehnig and his friends, known Denver skinheads. One of these friends, Dion Gertzy, will testify at Lisl's trial wearing a "Support Your Local Sons of Silence" baseball cap. During the interview, two things become clear. Lisl is afraid to identify Jaehnig and his friends. Unaware at this point that Jaehnig is dead, she describes herself as a walking dead person. And she's desperately anxious to appease the police. "I could beat myself in the head trying to come up with something that would satisfy you," she says at one point. Still, her performance is infuriating. Periodically, she bites at a fingernail or pulls at a strand of hair. "I'm going bald," she jokes mirthlessly. "Lisl," says Priest, "do you understand how important this is? This is murder. We need to know every bit of the truth." Lisl nods and promptly returns to her fabricated story. Later that same evening of November 12th, Lisl makes a second tape. Although she still maintains she does not know Jaehnig's name and still describes his car as green, she is clearer and more focused here. In some areas, the two tapes are entirely consistent, in her insistence that she only wanted to retrieve her belongings and in her description of the jolting, mind-numbing ride down the mountain. She says over and over again that she was terrified, that she begged Jaehnig to stop and that she tried to get out of the car. Sardine said, "Well, I guess this is what I'm going to have to do." And he pulled out the gun and set it on his lap, and he popped it, or whatever it is you do to guns. He rolled down a window, looked back outside, and we swerved all over the road. At this point, I was afraid for my life, and he asked me if I would take hold of the wheel, and if I didn't. Basically, he didn't give me a chance to respond. He just put his head out of the window and proceeded to fire. If I hadn't put my hand on the wheel, we would have been off the road, and I definitely would have died. "You're holding on to the steering wheel?" I held on to it for about 3 seconds. This admission will be the basis for some of the charges filed against Lisl Auman: attempted murder of a peace officer, assault, and felony menacing. The jury will acquit her of the first two but find her guilty of felony menacing. In addition, Denver District Attorney Bill Ritter will charge her with second-degree burglary and, stemming from the burglary, felony murder. The crime of felony murder occurs when someone is killed during the commission of a felony or while the perpetrators are in flight, whether or not that death was intended. All those who committed the felony, as well as any accomplices to it, are equally guilty under this law, even those who were physically absent when the death occurred. The law of felony murder goes back hundreds of years and is based on English, common law. The British, however, abandoned it over 40 years ago. It will send Lisl to prison for the rest of her life. "It's all blurry to me, the order it happened," Lisl continues. "But we ended up hitting a car, like head-on, and then there was traffic behind us, and at that point I opened the car door and wanted to get out, and he told me, 'What the fuck are you doing? Get back in here,' and all this shit, and he was furious. I just wanted it to be over. I listened to him because he had this huge gun. I stayed in the car, he shut the door, and he sped off again." Lisl also says that something struck her on the back of the head at the moment of impact. The Trans Am had smashed into a BMW on East Eastman Avenue. Later in the interview, Lisl says, "I was just praying to myself, praying to God that everything would end soon and everybody would be all right." Throughout the two interviews, you can see Auman fashioning a noose that Deputy District Attorney Tim Twining will eventually use to hang her. He will say that she voluntarily steered the car so that Jaehnig could shoot at the police. He will say that she is a vengeful woman who enlisted the aid of skinheads to terrorize and rob her ex-boyfriend, Sean Cheever. In support of this latter theory, he will cite, again and again, the following statement, which occurs on Lisl's second tape. Sean lied to me and made me feel like a piece of shit, and I wanted to retaliate, I guess. Twining will not stress. The following clarification. He lied to me, and I wanted my stuff back. On that tape, Lisl denies emphatically that she intended Cheever to be burglarized. Still, there is a moment that suggests she may have been aware the night before the trip that one of her companions, Dion Gertzi, had larcenous intentions. She quotes him as saying, "What else does he have?" And, weeping, admits that she mentioned a couple of speakers. And she quotes another damning exchange with Gertzi. "I said, take it easy on him. He's like, well, I'll do the best I can. And I think I said something like, just don't kill him. And he said something to the effect of either, I won't, or I can't promise anything, or something like that." During both interviews, Lisl often obligingly adopts her interrogator's vocabulary. When Priest suggests she brought the skinheads with her as muscle, she responds, I guess, and proceeds to employ the word herself later in the conversation. When he asks if Jaehnig, who sat outside in his car while the others were in the lodge at Buffalo Creek, was acting as a lookout, Lisl responds, I think so. What do you think he was looking out for? He seems confused. He might have been. Looking out. I don't even think he knew Sean was not there, though. Just looking out for whatever. On November 14th, after meeting with Deputy District Attorney Twining, Officers Jason Brake and Mark Bennett amended their original reports on the events at 3033 South Monaco 2 days earlier. Brake's first report said only that Lisl Auman had been ordered to come out and lie on the ground and then removed. In his second report, he now says, I could see the female standing at the corner of the hallway, and as Mark was ordering her out, observed her lean to her right, as if to drop something, then stand back up with no weapons in her hands. Directly behind the female suspect, I observed the male leaning over at a doorway, then turning around and running north in the hallway. At this time, I did not observe any weapon in his hands either. Bennett said at first that Auman had turned around and put her hands in the air. His November 14th report elaborates more. I observed the suspect, Jaehnig, attempting to gain entry into Apter A. Both of his hands were visible, and he did not have any weapons in them. A female was looking into the parking lot and was 2/3 visible with her right shoulder and arm concealed behind a plywood wall. As I ordered her out, she leaned slightly to the right before stepping into the doorway with her hands up. This was the basis of the prosecution's assertion in court and of numerous statements in the press that Lisl had passed Matthaeus Jaehnig, the rifle he used to kill Bruce VanderJagt. Several startling incidents followed the deadly events at Monaco. Place apartments. 6 days after the murder of Officer VanderJagt, skinhead Nathan Thill allegedly murdered African immigrant Umar Dia at a downtown bus stop, wounding Jeannie Van Velkenburg. The next day, a dead pig with the word VanderJagt scrawled on its side was tossed in front of the District 3 police substation. On November 20th, Officer Greg Vaca, responding to reports of a prowler near a West Denver apartment complex, was shot at in the parking lot, and huge numbers of police went on alert. Some days later, Stephen Dupre, a friend of Matthaeus Jaehnig's, was arrested for his role in the Buffalo Creek burglary. The Denver Post reported that shell casings in the area of the West Denver apartments matched his gun, and that his fingerprints had been found in one of the apartments. Speeches, sermons, and anti-hate rallies followed. It was a rare Denver official, who had nothing to say about skinheads. President Bill Clinton himself, in town for a fundraising visit, said, "We must not, and I know the city of Denver will not, tolerate acts of violence that are fed by hate against people of another color. And we must not tolerate violence and hatred targeted against police officers, the people who put their lives on the line for us every single day." The media fed the growing hysteria with articles titled "Scene of a Manhunt" and 10 Days of Rage. Carl Raschke, a professor at the University of Denver, fanned the apocalyptic furies. These people, skinheads, see themselves as warriors in a race with their enemies, he said. They've been talking about real war for a long time. Denver had become the locus for an archetypal struggle between good and evil, symbolized by the larger-than-life figures of the heroic policeman and his murderous, skulking skinhead enemies. In the eye of the storm stood the sorrowful figures of Anna VanderJagt and her 3-year-old daughter, Haley. There was no place for contradiction, fine distinctions, or shades of gray in this universe of absolutes. The voices of reason, those who pointed out that there appeared to be no link between the murder of Dia and that of VanderJagt, or who dared suggest that things are not always what they seem at first glance, were treated with hatred and suspicion. And there was no one to absorb all this opprobrium, all this high-minded public rage, but the young girl who happened to be in the killer's car just before the shooting. In the absence of any evidence to the contrary, her lawyers advised the family not to talk. Lisl Auman was turned into a hate-filled, gun-carrying skinhead, a vicious woman hell-bent on revenge against the man who had rejected her. That was the story, anyway. From the start, Officer Shauna Stone said that Lisl was belligerent and quoted her as saying, "I'm not telling you anything. I plead the fifth on this entire thing." But Brake and Bennett were not the only cops whose stories changed in the days after VanderJagt's death. In a videotape made November 12th, Officer Michael Gargaro had described Lisl's arrest. "I apprehended the female, handcuffed her and removed her from the immediate area. She didn't say anything until I got her on the ground and handcuffed her, and then she said, 'I don't know what this is all about. I don't know what's going on.'" In the car, before the shooting, Gargaro had asked Auman if Jaehnig had any weapons. "She said he has a gun, and I said what kind of gun, and we already knew he did because he had been firing at the Jefferson County police. I asked if it was big like the one I had, and she said, 'No, it's like a rifle,' and I asked if he had any extra ammunition. She said, 'I don't know. He's wearing a black leather jacket.'" On the way to the police station, Gargaro said, Lisl asked him if he knew the fallen officer. He said he did, and VanderJagt was a good man with a little daughter. Gargaro said that Lisl had responded, "I don't know anything. I can't help you. I just met him, Jaehnig, today. I'm sorry for your friend. I didn't mean for anything bad like this to happen." But here's how Gargaro described the arrest 6 months later, during a preliminary hearing. "I ordered her at least 4 times to go to the ground. She just wouldn't do it. She was loud to me. She was almost as though she was shouting at me, and she was aggressive. She began to move as though she wanted to get up. The defendant did not cooperate or answer any of my questions. She had to look towards the area where the other police officers were, and she showed no emotion of any kind." 1997 was a restless year for Lisl Auman. By that summer, she was living with several friends in a house in Englewood, drifting from job to job. Her parents had divorced 10 years earlier, and her mother remarried. Although all 3 parents, her father, Don Auman, Rob Auerbach, her stepfather, and her mother, Colleen, cooperated in providing warm, stable, and loving homes for Lisl and her brother Mason, the divorce hit hard. Through high school, Lisl lived alternately with Don and then with Rob and Colleen. Lisl was intelligent and artistically inclined, but she had trouble deciding on a career or direction. After one disastrous teenage experience with a boy who hit her, Lisl had no serious relationships with men. A reborn hippie and a fan of the Grateful Dead, she lived in the moment. She liked to read, hang with her friends, party, walk in the mountains, take photographs, and work on stained glass projects with her mother. Yet, something about this young woman inspired profound affection in those who knew her. Most of her friends are now settling down, working, or in college, some with small children. When they talk about Lisl, they tend to say similar things. They say she's gentle, warm and giving, fun to be around, and that she'd let you bum her. Last cigarette? Do anything to make you laugh or sing at the top of her voice in the shower? We'd sit on the porch and watch storms, says former roommate Robin Bartholomew. We chased a rainbow once in Lisl's car. We ended up just driving to a high spot and looking down at it. The prosecution said this was a vindictive, angry woman, and she wanted revenge and would go to any length to get it, says longtime friend Alicia Frederick. It was not Lisl. I almost wanted to laugh. I thought they were describing themselves. But things went wrong between the roommates in the Inglewood house. There were squabbles about bills, dishes, housekeeping, who'd last bought toilet paper. Lisl and a couple of friends decided to spend some time in the mountains. She had been offered a job working on forest rehabilitation. Lisl's mother was pleased with the idea. A slender woman with a narrow face, blonde hair, and a trusting manner, Colleen has spent the past year trying to puzzle out what has happened to her daughter, the steady stream of misinformation in the press, the vilification. Can they do that? She keeps asking. Can they just print whatever they want? Colleen has been a second mom to many of Lisl's friends, who remember summer afternoons in the Auerbach's backyard and meals at their table. Colleen explains that when she was 18, and unsure about what she wanted to do, she moved to Alaska with a friend. There, she worked on fishing boats and lived in a cabin without electricity or running water. It was a defining experience, and she hoped that Lisl's sojourn in the mountains would prove equally beneficial for her. At first, Lisl stayed at a house in Buffalo Creek with Robin and another friend, Stephanie Frumel. Stephanie introduced her to Sean Cheever, who lived in an old stone and wood lodge that had once been beautiful. The building was run down, the outside littered with broken glass and bits of colored plastic. Lisl got a room there but spent most of her time in Cheever's room with him. There was neither running water nor electricity, and Lisl bought Cheever a heater. In the beginning, Cheever was affectionate and attentive, but his interest soon cooled. Lisl remained smitten. She made him breakfast, she bought him presents. She had never dated anyone like Cheever before and found his tough logger persona romantic. But she was also becoming aware that he was a thief and a liar with an extensive arrest record. Sean Cheever showed me a shoebox full of other people's checkbooks once, Fromel says. He did petty crime, tons of it, impersonation. He was always in jail under a different name. During Lisl Auman's trial, Cheever would admit that he had deliberately exploited her for sex and money. Looking back, Fromel struggles to describe the atmosphere at the lodge. It was a crazy period, she says. For some reason, everybody was going through a massive personality change, the whole group of friends. We were doing things that were deteriorating our morals. Too much partying, drinking, being very preoccupied with the wrong things. She was a fierce emotional monster at the time. As for her friend, in hindsight, she was perfectly chaotic, perfectly out of her mind, perfectly not Lisl. Although she vacillated for a time, within a month, Lisl understood the self-destructive nature of her relationship with Cheever. It came home full force when he left for Denver to celebrate his birthday without her after she'd bought him an expensive snowboard as a gift. She was left alone at the lodge with half her possessions locked in Cheever's room. She became desperate to move out. At separate times in the week preceding November 12th, Colleen and Dawn offered to help, but Lisl was embarrassed at the idea of her parents meeting the rough-edged, gap-toothed Cheever. She had also been estranged from her closest friends since leaving the house she'd shared with them. It was then that she thought of Demetria Soriano. Lisl had known Dem, as everyone calls her, for years. For a time, they were very close. Once, before a Grateful Dead performance, they had danced in the parking lot in a lashing rainstorm and seen a man get hit by lightning. As the medics hustled him away, Soriano remembered he was still waving his ticket and insisting he had to go to the concert. When Lisl graduated from high school, Colleen bought tickets for both girls to San Francisco and arranged for them to stay with her sister there. Lisl and Soriano visited Haight-Ashbury and Chinatown. They rode the ferry to Alcatraz, played on the beach, and leaped into the cold waters of the sea. It was the first time I ever saw the sun set into the ocean, Soriano recalls. But there had also been periods of estrangement. One of these had occurred sometime before Lisl's move to the mountains. Lisl and Soriano had just begun tentative attempts at rapprochement a week before Lisl decided to leave Cheever. That year, Dame Soriano was going through a transformation of her own. The man she'd loved for a long time had left her early in the summer, and she was despondent and insecure, partying, drinking, and smoking dope. She rented a room in her condo at the Monaco Place apartment complex to a friend from junior high, Dion Gersey. 2 months after he moved in, she became his girlfriend. "I was still trying to sew my heart back together," she says now. Michael Jackson, an old friend of both Lisl and Soriano, visited Dem during this time. He noted that the apartment had changed. Soriano's tie-dye and tapestries were gone, and in their place was a case full of medieval torture instruments, a Confederate flag, and a gun lying on the table. Soriano introduced him to Gerza and to Gerza's friend Matthaeus Jaehnig. "I shook Jaehnig's hand," says Jackson, who is black. "There was a swastika tattooed on his arm. They acted perfectly pleasant, but I got out fast." With her dark, tumbling hair and olive skin, Soriano defines herself as Indian, Spanish, Irish, English, and Filipino. Jaehnig was a friend, she says, one she liked and admired. The only time Lisl visited, about a week before she decided to leave Cheever, Jaehnig wasn't at the apartment. On that occasion, Gerza and Soriano got into a fight, with Lisl in the next room. Gerza choked Soriano until she blacked out. But when Lisl called on November 11th, distraught, Soriano told her to come right over. Lisl did, bringing her dog, Jean, with her. The two young women spent the evening demolishing a bottle of sake and planning their future. They decided they would retrieve Lisl's possessions, get rid of their no-good boyfriends, and live together. "It was just, Lisl, you and I are back together," Soriano remembers in her slightly hoarse, throaty voice. "We'll have fun with our lives again." There was some conversation between the two women and Gerza about helping Lisl move and enlisting the aid of Gerza's friends. Who said exactly what is still unclear. Everyone agrees on one thing, however. At no point did Lisl use the word revenge or appear angry and vindictive toward Cheever. Gerza, who otherwise shows no particular inclination to protect Lisl, was very clear about this during his police interview, despite intense and persistent questioning. "Was she mad at him?" asks the interviewer on the videotape. "No, she was just sad. I don't think she was mad at all. Spiteful? I don't think so. I think she just fucking felt like a piece of shit. You know we've talked to Lisl. Are you sure that you did not hear anyone talk about punishing Sean? No. Bullshit, no. No punishment. We went there to get her stuff, her fucking clothes. Any conversation before you went or while you were there? I'm gonna get that son of a bitch? I heard nothing out of her mouth like that." "Nothing?" "No. I'm gonna take this because he doesn't deserve it, and I paid for it? I heard I'm gonna take that because I paid for it because it's mine. But I didn't hear I'm gonna get him, or no. Shit like that. No, we weren't there like that." By the next morning, though, Lisl had serious doubts about the entire enterprise. She was afraid of Gerza and his friends and unsure of their intentions. When she and Soriano went to a Taco Bell to cash a check, she told Soriano she wanted to abandon the idea of getting her belongings, at least for that day. Soriano, however, urged her to go through with it. She pointed out that Lisl had written checks for Cheever's gifts that she might be unable to cover. Besides, she said, Gerza had set things up, and it was too late to back out. Lisl knew what. That meant she knew I was scared of Dion, Soriano says of her then-boyfriend. I was terrified of him. He had threatened to kill me. He had threatened to kill my whole family. If you went against Dion, you might not be there the next day. The friends Gerza had recruited were Matthaeus Jaehnig, who had a record for assault, and drug and weapons possession, and Stephen Dupre, whose rap sheet was even longer. Soriano and Lisl had planned to ride together, but the men insisted that Lisl travel in Jaehnig's red Trans Am with him. Tao Jaehnig, Probably wanted to fuck her, Gerza speculates on the interview video. Soriano and Dupre rode with Gertz in Soriano's black Chevy Cavalier. Gerza describes his mood as light-hearted. He intended to help his girlfriend's friend move, he told the police, and to play in the mountains. At the lodge, Lisl greeted some people she knew. She and Soriano began retrieving clothes, books, and other belongings from her room. Jaehnig stayed outside in his car. At one point, Soriano joined him for a smoke break. Meanwhile, no one has said precisely who cut the lock on Cheever's door with bolt cutters. Prosecutor Twining attributes this act to Lisl because Soriano testified that Lisl came down the stairs and handed her the cutters. But it is more likely that one of the men wielded this large, cumbersome implement. Amid the flurry of accusations and counter-accusations that followed the burglary, it was hard to ascertain exactly what was taken from Cheever's room. The disputed items are the snowboard Lisl had bought, 2 camcorders, one Lisl's, the other broken, a pair of Cheever's speakers, one of which had been outside his door in the hallway, a tripod, an amplifier, and a box of CDs in which Auman's and Cheever's discs were mixed. At some point, Lisl became aware that the men were taking items that were not hers. Soriano believes she was afraid to challenge them. "They were on top of us the whole time," she says. "There was really nothing she could have done." Stephanie Fromel has her take on what happened. "I guess you could call it a burglary," she says. "Sean stole the things. If that makes them his, well, there you go." The cars outside the lodge were loaded. Concerned at what he'd seen, one of Cheever's friends took down Jaehnig's license plate number. Someone else called 911. The red Trans, and sped away. Soriano's car left and then returned. Dupre jumped out to help himself to another box of discs. 9 days after Lisl's trip to the lodge, a pizza was delivered to a room at a Quality Inn in Wheat Ridge. The bill was only $14 or $15. The delivery man was handed a $25 check with a woman's signature. He left, then returned to point out the discrepancy. It was Sean Cheever who opened the door. "Just give me $5, Cheever told the pizza man, according to police reports, "and we'll call it even." The check was forged. When police arrived, they discovered handgun shells in the room, cocaine, and 4 women's purses, all stolen from maids at the Quality Inn. They also found Lisl Auman's checkbook. Cheever had been frequenting upscale Denver hotels and stealing patrons' IDs to set up bank accounts. He had rented and never returned a chainsaw. 8 months before the Buffalo Creek break-in, he'd been arrested in Aurora for attacking his common-law wife. He had swung a vacuum cleaner at her, almost striking their 5-month-old baby. 2.5 months after the burglary, in January 1998, Cheever informed his Buffalo Creek landlords, Red Jessup and Connie Matthews, that he had impregnated their 13-year-old daughter. Furious, Jessup reported it to police, but no charges were filed against Cheever. In a motion to exclude this information from Lisl's trial, at one point the young girl was expected to testify against her. Cheever, too, would be taking the stand. Ecode, Twining, and DA Bill Ritter explained why. Other than the parents' sick oral report to the unknown Denver police detective, there are no other reports concerning this allegation. Moreover, because all that was reported were the child's parents' allegations, the Denver police never opened an investigation, much less were charges ever filed. In addition, the motion stated the 13-year-old was unlikely to cooperate. In an investigation, Lisl doesn't even bother to tell police it's a dead end there. She knows where he, Jaehnig, is. She knows it is a dead end. At that moment, there is one person only, who can save Bruce VanderJagt's life, and that is Lisl Auman. Prosecutor Tim Twining at Auman's trial. "I have provided security for that complex for approximately 7 years. Officer Michael Gargaro, preliminary hearing. Officer VanderJagt says there isn't any other way out of there. He said, 'Do you want to go in, or do you want me to go in?' Sergeant Jones comes up. Officer VanderJagt apprises him of the same thing, that there's no way out. Officer Donald Bowling on a video made the day of VanderJagt's murder. If VanderJagt knew that he, Jaehnig, was armed with the armament he had available, VanderJagt would not have peeked around the corner in the fashion he did. Prosecutor: Henry Cooper. She said he has a gun. We already knew he did because he had been firing at the Jefferson County Police. Officer Michael Gargaro. On a video made the day of VanderJagt's murder, Lisl Auman went on trial in Denver District Court in July 1998. Before the trial, the district attorney's office offered Auman a plea bargain. Lisl would have had to plead guilty to assaulting the officer when she took the wheel, says Angela Cruz, Lisl's defense attorney. She would have had to plead guilty to knowing that Matthaeus Jaehnig had weapons in his car. These things would have been with her for life when she didn't do them. Auman would have received a 30-year prison sentence in exchange for these pleas. She turned down the deal. Without the draconian felony murder law, there would not have been much of a case. Her lawyers believe that if Jaehnig had lived, Lisl would have been used as a witness against him and might never have been charged. The felony murder law, however, made it possible to argue that if Lisl knew Goetze and his friends intended to burglarize Cheever's room and then directed them to it, she was an accomplice to the felony and hence guilty of the murder. Still, this theory might have struck a jury as a flimsy structure on which to hang a capital conviction. Postulate that Lisl was a willing participant in all that happened after the burglary, however, that she was filled with anger and the thirst for revenge, that she deliberately steered the car so that Jaehnig could shoot, that she handed him the gun at the condo complex, that she was hostile to the police, and you had a much more compelling argument. Add to all this some passionate rhetoric, insist it was Lisl's lack of cooperation that doomed BruceVanderJagt, factor in the intense public feeling swirling around the case, and your chances of conviction skyrocket. Constructing the necessary narrative requires selective use of the available facts. It means insisting that Lisl knew Jaehnig had a rifle in his car because the weapon was too big to conceal, but accepting that she could somehow sneak this same weapon to Jaehnig at the condo complex without the cops who were standing a few feet away from her seeing it. It means believing Lisl when she uses the words muscle or retaliate in her interviews with police, while refusing to accept her frequent and consistent protestations of fear and revulsion. Duress would be a valid defense against the burglary charge. Cab driver Art Kent witnessed the collision caused by Jaehnig during his wild drive down the mountain. He passed right next to me going up Eastman, Kent told the newspapers immediately after the incident. He was scared. He was stressed. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't hesitate at all after he hit her. He just threw it into reverse and burned rubber. In the courtroom, however, Kent said Lisl had had plenty of time to get out of the car if she wanted to. In court, Cruz described Lisl's second attempt to escape from Jaehnig's car. Passing a school, the vehicle slowed momentarily. Some children saw the passenger door open and a white laundry basket flew out. The attorney said the basket had been between Lisl's legs, and she was preparing to jump from the car when Jaehnig threatened her again. But Twining characterized this incident as an attempt to get rid of stolen loot. Fellow prosecutor Henry Cooper hypothesized that Lisl had thrown out the basket to allow Jaehnig easier access to his gun. Did Lisl pass the gun to Matthaeus Jaehnig at the complex? No one who knows either Auman or Jaehnig finds the idea remotely plausible. Sam Jaehnig says his brother would never have left his car without his weapon once shots had been fired. Lisl's friends speak of her fear and hatred of guns. Her mother remembers her long, passionate arguments with a grandfather who hunted. But it's the physical evidence that's most compelling. A videotape taken the day of the murder reveals deep gouges on the door of Soriano's Monaco Place apartment. The likeliest explanation is that the butt of Jaehnig's rifle made these as he hammered furiously at the lock. Auman's fingerprints were not found on the gun. Twining says no usable fingerprints at all were detected. Demetria Soriano, Dion Goetze. and Stephen Dupre had pleaded guilty to the Jefferson County burglary long before Auman came to trial. Although any of them could have been charged under the felony murder law, their sentences were relatively light. Only Dupre, who violated parole on the day of the killing, is still in prison. According to Assistant District Attorney Chuck Lepley, the gun found on Dupre at his arrest was indeed the one used to shoot at Officer Greg Vaca. But after seeing Dupre in a lineup, Vaca was positive that he was not the gunman. When asked about the other defendants' plea bargains, Twining responds that they were not charged in this jurisdiction, and we had no communications with them about anything they were going to do about that. We were careful not to be involved in their cases. The DA was anxious from the get-go, says Demetria Soriano's attorney, Jim Dodd. Denver Chief Deputy DA Lamar Sims contacted me within 24 hours, attempting to cut a deal to get her to provide information. They talked to her, the prosecution, and the police in advance of my being retained. It was a classic Monica Lewinsky kind of thing. She got told if she didn't help, they'd come down on her pretty hard. Both Gertza and Soriano testified at Auman's trial, but their versions of events largely matched hers. Lisl's family and friends found the courtroom atmosphere intensely intimidating. Michael Jackson, who spoke as a character witness, was astonished when Judge Nancy Rice made a joke about his name. "Michael Jackson," he remembers her saying. "I thought we'd already tried him. My hands were already sweaty," says Jackson. The jury laughed. The cops were laughing. I had to bite my tongue and sit there. Other friends speak of police glaring at them, blocking the doorway so they could not leave the courtroom until all the officers exited. Standing outside in the corridor, some witnesses were surprised to hear police officers discussing their experiences on the stand. "I was told you're not supposed to talk to any other witnesses," says one. But they'd say to each other, "Well, what did you say? What kind of questions did they ask?" Given the devastating impact of her videotaped police interview, which the jurors viewed, it might have helped her case for Lisl herself to testify, particularly since duress was an important factor in her defense. Cruz will not say why she did not put her client on the stand. She may have hesitated to let Lisl testify because of her poor performance on the police videos. She may have felt that the defense was sufficiently compelling without Lisl's testimony. It wasn't. The jury found Lisl guilty of felony murder. By the law, they had not been told before they deliberated that a felony murder conviction would mean a mandatory life sentence. A few days later, Lisl Auman was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison. That sentence haunts one juror, who found the DA's witnesses and presentation unconvincing. "I'm thinking there is no way anybody is going to convict this girl of felony first-degree murder," says juror Linda Chin. "I almost felt sorry for the district attorneys." But in the jury room, Chin found herself in the minority. The discussion was legalistic, hewing closely to the definition of felony murder and whether Auman's actions fit that definition. Most of the jurors seemed to find the weapon-passing argument less than credible, but they also did not believe that Lisl had tried to escape from Jaehnig's car. Slowly, Chin became convinced it was her duty to hang the jury. But the next day, I guess I started thinking, am I going to be the only person here that the whole city of Denver and the police department know wouldn't vote for conviction? Chin remembers. The night before, I was sure I could do it. The key, jurors decided to watch Lisl's second videotaped interview with the police again. There she was, her voice flat and gravelly, lying about Jaehnig's name and the color of his car. "I just lost my desire to keep fighting," says Chin, her eyes filling with tears. The jurors took another vote, and this time Chin voted guilty. Within 30 minutes, I regretted it, she says. Even when they were polling the jury, it flashed through my mind. I wonder what would happen if all of a sudden I said, "No, I've changed my mind." Herbert Greenberg, a retired University of Denver professor who served on the jury, felt that Twining had successfully assembled all of the elements required to prove felony murder. Although he did not believe that Auman had passed the gun to Jaehnig, he found the defense's contention that the police had lied profoundly distasteful. 2 weeks after Lisl Auman's trial ended, Governor Roy Romer appointed Judge Nancy Rice to the Colorado Supreme Court. On January 25th of this year, Sean Cheever was finally charged with sexual assault on a child. The alleged offense date was November 1st, 1997, 11 days before Lisl Auman went to his room to get her things. Replaying the events of November 12, 1997, Lisl Auman keeps returning to that moment outside the Monaco Place apartments, with a crazed gunman at her back and battle-ready police in front of her. The moment before anyone had died. She is sitting at a table in the visiting area of the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility, looking as unlike the morose, leaden creature on the police videotape as humanly possible. Her hair is light and flyaway, and her face is soft, open, and vulnerable. "Sometimes it seems like a dream," she says, "a nightmare. But I'll never wake up." She talks about her undeserved reputation as a skinhead and how frightened she was when she first entered jail and had to convince the Black and Mexican inmates the image was false. It's a lot harder to convince the rest of the world. She veers between hope and despair. She tries to meditate, read, she's currently racing through Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible, and keep her mind steady. She misses her family and friends, long walks in the mountains, and her dog. "I'm only 23 years old," she says. "I still want to have children." Her days in the courtroom were terrifying. She remembers the way the police looked at her. "I would think to myself, they think I'm this horrible person who killed their friend, or brother, or loved one, and they'd sit there and look at me with such hate in their eyes. And that was hard. I wish there were something I could do to prove to them that I'm not the person they think I am. That wouldn't make any difference, but it would make me feel better. Mrs. VanderJagt wouldn't even accept my apology in court. I can understand she's just lost somebody she loves very much, and she's grieving." Later, she held a press conference and said, "I do not accept Lisl Auman's apology or condolences because I think she should take responsibility for what happened. I'm not going to take responsibility for something I did not do. This woman is the catalyst to everything that happened that day," Tim Twining said of Lisl Auman after the verdict. "She is the fuse to the powder keg at Monaco Place." But Matthaeus Jaehnig's friends are sure he was fleeing police, not because he thought he'd been involved in a burglary, but because his car was stolen and, despite arrests for weapons possession, he was carrying guns. His sister, Yelena, says Jaehnig was withdrawn and angry during the last months of his life. Lyman Jackson says Matthaeus was completely wiped out. The human being was gone. A few people could still reach him, but many of his friends were scared and staying away. When Jaehnig's body was autopsied, it was found to contain enough methamphetamine to kill the average person. Jaehnig's fury, madness, and hatred of police created the explosive power that destroyed Officer VanderJagt. Lisl Auman's misfortune was to have been with him on the day he blew. Last year, about this time, when police were chasing Matthaeus Jaehnig through the dusky shadows of the southeast Denver condo complex, Lisl Auman was sitting in a squad car, telling cops to go to hell. She didn't give them any information about her new friend Jaehnig. It was reported that, amidst her obscenities, she spit in the face of one police officer asking questions. She might as well have pulled the trigger herself, and the jurors knew it. Chuck Green, Denver Post. "Spit on a police officer, tell him to go to hell. A sweet little girl. You assholes at Sherman Way ought to be in prison with her. Have a nice life." One more thing, scumbags. You may be able to change your phone number to try to hide from decent people, but can you afford to change? Your address? Later, jackass. We're not like the cops. We don't have our hands tied. 2 words for Colleen. Suck it. The message was left on the Auerbach's answering machine shortly after the trial. Lisl Auman's life sentence has had a devastating effect on her family and friends, most of whom have never been in any trouble with the law. "I'm afraid of the police," says Alicia Frederick. They can do whatever they want to. Jaime Sostman, too, is afraid. What if I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time someday? She says. You don't know how much I feel this is my fault, says Demetria Soriano, crying. She was my best friend. She didn't know these people. She didn't have a clue what she was in for that day. Once she got in that car with Tao and closed the door, there was nothing she could have done. Don Auman has set up a web page for his daughter, www.easl.com. He spends long hours researching her case, hoping for a reversal on appeal. A hard-working, law-abiding man, he has found his faith in the government and the legal system sorely tested. After the verdict, Rob Auerbach, Liesl's stepfather, commented that he regretted it almost immediately and continues to regret it. As the police filed past him, he said, "There go the Nazis." Today, Auerbach still weeps when he talks about Liesl's predicament. Colleen remembers being at a picnic last summer and hearing a neighbor talk about a nervous breakdown she'd suffered. I remember thinking, "Well, how do you have one of those?" Colleen says. "I qualify to have one." She thinks about her daughter constantly. Her life has been so short, Colleen says. She hasn't had an opportunity to make major decisions and plan long-range goals. Our kids do things that make us mad sometimes and things we question. But Lisl is anybody's kid, and we are just any family. July 12, 2005, Lisl Auman pleaded guilty Monday to burglary and accessory to first-degree murder in connection with the slaying of Denver police officer Bruce VanderJagt on November 12, 1997. Auman, 29, agreed to the maximum sentence of 20 years. Prosecutors stipulated that the sentence would be served in the community corrections system. If her scheduled sentencing on August 22nd proceeds without a hitch, which is not guaranteed, Auman might be out of prison and in a halfway house within months. After the hearing, Auman stated defense attorney Susan Fish, "I realize how emotionally painful and difficult a trial can be. As a result, accepting this plea agreement is an opportunity to alleviate any further pain for the VanderJagt family, my family, the community, and myself," Auman said. "This plea agreement allows me to pursue the goals and dreams that I've only been able to think about for the last 8 years, as well as to give back to the community in a way that I could not do from prison," she added. VanderJagt's widow, Anna VanderJagt, said on Monday that she agreed with the plea, although she had previously advocated that Auman not be released. "I've been through a lot of prayer," she told the Denver Post, "and I accept that at this moment in time, under these current circumstances, this is the right thing." Auman was convicted in July 1998 of first-degree felony murder, second-degree, burglary, menacing, and conspiracy to commit first-degree burglary. The first-degree felony conviction carried a life sentence without parole. However, in March, the Colorado Supreme Court threw out the felony first-degree murder and burglary convictions, saying that the trial judge left out a crucial word, knowingly, when instructing the jury about the elements of second-degree burglary. The High Court ordered a new trial on those counts. Lynn Kimbrough, spokeswoman for the Denver District Attorney's Office, said that the pleas were Auman's first acknowledgement of wrongdoing on her part. Kimbrough said the admission of guilt was key to prosecutors accepting the deal. It had to be a just disposition, and it had to be one where Miss Auman would accept her responsibility and her role in causing the events that led to the death of a Denver police officer, Kimbrough said. She pleaded guilty today. She stood up there and acknowledged that she had a role in the events that led to the death of that officer. But Robert Simonik, VanderJagt's brother-in-law, said Auman was given the second chance that VanderJagt never had. He said it wasn't right that Auman did not face a retrial. Simonik said he wears a bracelet as a tribute to VanderJagt. "Sadly, we move on. Bruce has been reduced to nothing but a memory," he said. Matt Mosley, the Auman family spokesman, said the family's greatest sympathies continue to be with the VanderJagt family, but we are very excited that she is coming home. the possibility that she will be coming home. Denver Police Chief Jerry Whitman issued a statement Monday after the hearing. "If released to community corrections, I hope Ms. Auman takes advantage of the second chance that a technicality of the legal system has granted her to undo the damage she has done to innocent people who suffered from her criminal actions." VanderJagt was killed by skinhead Matthaeus Jaehnig, one of several people who went to the Jefferson County boarding house of Auman's former boyfriend, Sean Cheever. The prosecution claimed that the Auman-led group went there not only to recover some of Auman's belongings but also to steal Cheever's property. But the defense claimed Auman intended to retrieve only her belongings and that the four others agreed to help. The defense said there was no agreement to steal Cheever's property. The couple was chased from the boarding house into Denver, where Denver police picked up the pursuit, and VanderJagt was killed. At the time VanderJagt was shot, Auman had been sitting handcuffed in a police car for 5 minutes. Auman's plea agreement in the case Monday stipulated a community corrections sentence, but that isn't guaranteed. Greg Morrow, Assistant Director of Denver Community Corrections, said that the 21-member Denver Community Corrections Board first has to accept Auman. They could reject her application at an August 17th meeting. Among the considerations are the nature of the case and an individual's danger to the community. They will look at the risk to public safety, he said. Also, Denver District Judge Christina Habas told Auman that she could reject the plea agreement. Morrow said that people accepted into community corrections often can return home within a year. He said on average they stay in a halfway house for about 9 months and then can move to an apartment or house. That house could be Auman's family residence. The Denver Post is running a 3-part series on the story. Here's a quick synopsis. Of the day's events, Lisl Auman said she just wanted to get her stuff back. So, on November 12, 1997, she, a friend from high school, and 3 men headed to the lodge where she and her boyfriend lived in Buffalo Creek. The trip led to a high-speed police chase to a Denver apartment building, where Denver police officer Bruce VanderJagt was shot and killed by one of the men. Auman, who was in police custody when the officer was slain, was convicted of felony murder and imprisoned for life without parole. The case remains controversial. The application of the felony murder statute to Auman's circumstances is unique in Colorado and rare nationally. 3 police officers changed their accounts of the shooting, and one juror says she regrets buckling to pressure to convict. The prosecution says Auman committed a crime and rightly paid the price for an officer's death. Within weeks, Auman is expected to appeal her conviction. In anticipation of that, and now that emotions have eased for many, this 3-part series raises new issues, unearths details, and reviews the unusual qualities of the case. It is the product of 5 months of reviewing police reports, videotapes, trial transcripts, and interviews with the attorneys, jurors, and defendant. April 30th, police cars blocked the streets, lights flashing, radio chatter blasting from open car doors, officers crouched behind shrubbery. SWAT team members wearing protective vests and helmets surrounded the Monaco Parkway Apartments complex, some using their vehicles for cover. Their weapons were drawn. A news helicopter hovered over the building, its camera sweeping the scene. The noise was deafening. It was just before 3 p.m., and 17-year-old Travis Ford was walking home from school near Monaco and Hampton when an officer shouted at him, "Get the F down!" Ford dropped to the ground behind a police car. Police officers were running, peering around corners and yelling at one another, but the helicopter, the radio chatter, and the noise swallowed their voices. Then, the sound of gunshots and unmistakable staccato pierced the din. "Officer down! Officer down! We need an ambulance. Code 10. Officer down! We need help over here. It's not looking good." A hail of gunfire followed, the sound ripping through the air, pounding and ricocheting through the hallways. Barbara Happel was inside her neighboring Monaco Parkway apartment when bullets burst through the dining room wall. She ran to the living room, threw herself to the floor, and called 911. The scream of sirens followed. Ambulances and fire trucks careened down the street. SWAT team members Mark Haney and Andy Ramirez dragged Officer Bruce VanderJagt out of the hallway, trailing his blood across the snow. Officers scooped his body onto a stretcher and loaded him into an ambulance. Bullets had torn through the right side of his head, his chest, his arms, and his legs. Paramedics squeezed air into his lungs with a ventilator bag and pumped his chest. They raced to Denver General Hospital, alerting trauma surgeons on the way. The 47-year-old VanderJagt never moved, never spoke, never drew another breath. In the back of a police car, 21-year-old Lisl Auman watched the tumult. Handcuffed, searched for weapons, belted into the seat, and locked into cruiser number A6979, she heard the gunfire and saw the frantic scene around her. Finally, the shooting stopped. Sergeant Calvin Hemphill strode toward the police car and looked hard into her face. "This is murder one, and you're going down," he said. "You're going down." As if it were yesterday, 2.5 years later, Auman recalls November 12, 1997, as if it were yesterday. She looks much the same as in her police mugshot, with a little longer blonde hair and a little weight gain. She idly, self-consciously pulls at her prison suit as she talks. She's 24 now, living at the Colorado Women's Correctional Facility, doing life without possibility of parole. She was convicted of felony murder on July 17, 1998. Her appeal is set to begin this spring. The controversy over Auman's conviction has never waned. Her defenders say she was wrongly convicted in a rage-inspired campaign to avenge the death of a police officer. In their view, Auman was a hostage caught up in a maelstrom of terror created by a drug-crazed, violent lunatic. They say lies, police intimidation, and grotesque manipulation of public opinion were used to extract a conviction from the jury. Her accusers say she was part of the criminal subculture and the mastermind behind the plot to burglarize and terrorize her former boyfriend, which started the chain of events that led to VanderJagt's murder, for which she must bear legal responsibility. Legal experts continue to debate the troubling questions of the case. At the very least, some say, her conviction for a crime that was committed while she was in police custody breaks new legal ground, sending a chilling message about the increasingly long arm of the law. The typical felony murder conviction goes like this. A couple of crooks, let's call them Bonnie and Clyde, decide to hold up a liquor store, a bank, a 7-Eleven. Something goes wrong, and somebody panics. Clyde shoots and kills a clerk. It doesn't matter that Bonnie never fired her revolver, never meant to kill. Under the law, she still is liable for the clerk's death. Colorado law states, the purpose of the felony murder statute is to hold a participating robber accountable for a non-participant's death, even though unintended, as long as death is caused by an act committed in the course of, or in furtherance, of the robbery or the course of immediate flight therefrom. Lisl Auman was convicted under the felony murder statute. It was anything but typical. No one else has been convicted in Colorado of felony murder for a killing that occurred while the suspect was in police custody. Though not unique in U.S. history, it's rare. University of Denver criminal law professor Jeffrey Harche said the closest thing to recent relevant case law is conspiracy. Courts have generally found that your obligation as a conspirator ends once you get caught, especially about crimes that go beyond the contemplation of the original. Conspiracy, he said. District Attorney Bill Ritter disagrees. She wasn't at the margin concerning involvement in felony murder, he said. Felony murder is a powerful statute. Some say it is too powerful. Conspiracy and felony murder are the favored children in the prosecutor's nursery, Harche said. District attorneys love them because their responsibility as prosecutors is significantly diminished. Ordinarily, if you're trying to prove murder, you have to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that the mental state of the defendant is such that he intended to kill. Hartje explained. With felony murder and conspiracy, you don't have to show intention, making a conviction much easier. He said the statutes are draconian and the penalties are severe. In many cases, circumstantial evidence and public outrage have been enough to convict. But that is an oversimplification, Ritter said. To understand Lisl Auman's conviction, he said, you must go back to November 11th, 1997. The story began that night. We were drinking sake, Auman recalls. A few days before, Auman had left her rented room in the old Hudson Hotel Lodge at Buffalo Creek. She was fed up with her boyfriend, Sean Cheever. I felt like he was cheating on me, whatever, and I was just like, I don't like this. It doesn't feel right. I remember one weekend I went back home to my mom and I was telling her about Sean, how I didn't trust him, and I felt like he was playing games with me. She said, let's go up there and get your stuff. And I said, well, I don't know, and I thought about it, and I guess I just didn't want to bring my mom into that. But soon after that conversation, Auman knew she had to leave Buffalo Creek. She packed a few days' worth of clothes and her dog and went to her dad's house in Denver. She spent 1 or 2 nights there, then called her best friend from high school, Demetria Soriano. Auman told Soriano she wanted to leave Cheever and invited her to move in with her. Soriano lived with her boyfriend, Dion Goertze, in Monaco and Hampton, in Denver. But the relationship was ending, and the 2 women saw it as an opportunity to start over. We bonded, Auman said. She's like, Dion's a real jerk, and he's moving out soon. Auman had been renting a room at the lodge but had spent considerable time in Cheever's room. She said she wanted to retrieve a comforter, the rest of her clothes, her mandolin, jewelry, dog food, a camcorder, and a snowboard. I told her I needed to go back and get my stuff, but my plates were expired on my car. I needed help, and Demi said, well, I'll help you. And I knew it would take more than 1 car, and so I think Dion was somewhere in on the conversation. I remember he planned for his friend to help us with his car to move my stuff. Dion's friend, Matthaeus Jaehnig, came to the apartment briefly that night. They agreed to drive to the lodge when Cheever would be at work the next day. Sometime after noon on November 12th, the group met at Soriano's apartment. Auman rode with Jaehnig in his red Trans Am, and Soriano, Goertze, and another friend of Jaehnig's, named Stephen Dupre, piled into Soriano's black Chevy for the trip to Buffalo Creek. 2 residents, Carrie and Sabrina Matthews, watched from a window as Auman and Soriano got out of the cars and went to Auman's room. Goertze and Dupre went to Cheever's room, carrying bolt cutters. Jaehnig stayed in the driveway in the parked Trans Am. Another lodge resident, Mary Lucas, said Auman stopped by her room and said hello. Lucas recalled asking her, "What are you doing here?" She said Auman didn't reply. She walked down the hall, toward her room. Lucas told police that Cheever had placed a padlock on his door because he didn't trust Lisl. She watched Soriano and Auman carry clothes and other items from Auman's room and load them into the cars. At one point, she said, Auman carried a white basket containing a video recorder and tripod down to the Trans Am. Auman sat in the passenger seat and tried to put the basket on her lap. Unable to do so, she got out of the car, put the basket on the floor on the front passenger side, and got back into the car with her feet straddling the basket. That detail would prove important later. In the trial, Daniel Matson told police he was lifting weights in his lodge room when he heard the cars approaching outside. Moments later, he stepped into the hall and saw a man with a handlebar mustache carrying a speaker from Cheever's room. He went back into his room, looked out the window, and saw another guy putting bolt cutters into the Trans Am. Matson said he was convinced they were ripping off Sean. He went downstairs, walked outside the lodge, and approached the black car. "Do you mind if I write down your plates?" One of the men responded that he didn't want him recording the license numbers, but Matson stood there with paper and pen and wrote "Black Car, EHZ 8.86, and Red Temporary 2535 R. Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy Phil Pedigo was having lunch with fellow Deputy Michael Sensano at the Conifer Plaza subway when, at 2:33 p.m., a call came in about a burglary in progress. 2 cars were identified as suspect vehicles: a black Chevy and a red Trans Am with temporary plates. Sensano was on his way to the old Hudson Hotel when he radioed that he thought he saw the red Trans Am around Kennedy Gulch. Pedigo turned around and followed the car. He noticed that the occupants were watching him in their mirrors. He requested backup and said he'd try to stop the Trans Am when it emerged from the canyon where it would be safer. Deputy Ed Pearson joined the pursuit near Parmalee Gulch. Officers followed the Trans Am, driving about 40 minutes on the narrow road through Aspen Park. They hit the overhead lights just north of Turkey Creek, signaling the driver to pull over. Auman later told police that Jaehnig looked at the flashing lights and told her, "I'm not stopping." The chase started at that point, Pedigo told Denver police in a videotaped interview. It was 2:46 p.m. "We hit 85 to 90 real quick. We were going very fast, Auman said. Pedigo, whose patrol car was a Chevy Blazer, had trouble keeping up with the Trans Am. He's changing lanes around other cars. Then a vehicle moved over and he took off like a shot. He was going 100 m/h. That's as fast as the Blazer will go. The chase continued through the heavy afternoon traffic on US 285 past Kipling, Wadsworth, and Santa Fe. A few different times I wanted to get out of the car, Auman said. I asked him why he wouldn't pull over. He just kept on going. Pedigo lost sight of the Trans Am just east of Interstate 25. Traffic was at a dead stop. I lost him, Pedigo said. But then someone at the intersection was pointing into the neighborhood north of Hampton at Dahlia. Pedigo and Pearson cruised the neighborhood with their overhead lights off, seeking the Trans Am. I was by an elementary school, Pedigo said. I was driving real slow. I had my window down, trying to hear the vehicle. I had a feeling we would terminate the chase. It was done. We had lost them. All of a sudden, Pearson told Denver police, "There's the suspect vehicle again." Auman said Jaehnig told her, "Well, I guess this is what I'm going to have to do." And he pulled out this gun and sat it on his lap. He popped it, or whatever it is you do with a gun. He rolled down the window and looked back outside. We're swerving all over the road. Auman said she had not seen the gun in the car. It was in a sleeve or something, she said. At this point, I was afraid for my life. He asked me to take a hold of the wheel, and basically he didn't wait for me to respond. He just put his head out the window and proceeded to fire. Pearson said the Trans Am was traveling about 35 meters. He saw the driver lean out the window with both hands on an automatic rifle. He shot 3 rounds at me. Bam, 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 Pearson said. He dropped back briefly but tried to follow the Trans Am until he lost sight of the car on Monaco, about a block north of Hampton. After shooting at Pearson, Auman said, "We ended up hitting a car head-on. I opened the car door and I wanted to get out. I just wanted it to be over." School children in the neighborhood reported seeing the passenger door fly open and a basket, the one witness saw Auman place between her feet when she left Buffalo Creek, come out before the door slammed, and the car sped away. Auman said the basket flew out the door between her feet as she tried to jump. Auman said Jaehnig yelled at her to shut the door. He said, "What the f are you doing? Get back in here." I listened to him because he had this huge gun, Auman said. Moments later, the Trans Am backed into the last empty parking place at the apartment complex at Monaco and Hampton. He was right behind me. Jaehnig and Auman ran toward apartment number 3323, Soriano's place. I got out of the car, Auman said. He was right behind me. The door was locked when they got to the apartment, and the police surrounded the building. Auman and Jaehnig were in an exterior hallway that went through the complex. The officers were yelling, "Come out! Show me your hands! Get on your knees!" I just came out with my hands up, Auman said. I came out walking real slow. I did exactly what they told me to do. They were asking me where he was, and I had no idea where he was, Auman said. The last time they saw him was the last time I saw him, she explained. I have no idea what happened after I came out. It was intense then. Officer Michael Gargaro pushed Auman's face into the snow. He put his knee on her back, handcuffed her, and pulled her off the ground by her arms. He led her away to a patrol car. When Auman surrendered, Jaehnig took off real fast down the hallway, according to Denver police officer Jason Brake. Seeing that, Officer Mark Bennett ran around the complex to intercept Jaehnig, but the hallway was a dead end. Meanwhile, VanderJagt stepped around the corner of the building toward the hallway. Jaehnig opened fire. When VanderJagt fell, Jaehnig grabbed his service revolver and scrambled back to the hallway. A roar of gunfire erupted as police officers poured more than 150 rounds into the small alcove. The percussion from the automatic rifle shots reverberated on the chests of the officers as their hearts pounded. VanderJagt's body was dragged to safety and then carried to an ambulance. The shooting stopped. They were telling people to settle down, regain their composure, Pearson said. Everyone was upset from seeing the injured officer. An eerie quiet followed. Finally, the officers entered the bullet-ridden alcove. Jaehnig's body was sprawled on the ground. He had put VanderJagt's revolver to his chin and pulled the trigger. May 1st, the afternoon she was arrested in connection with the shooting death of Denver police officer Bruce VanderJagt plays like a cheap horror movie inside her head. "Oh man, I was a mess," recalls Lisl Auman, who was serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. "I wanted to get out of the situation. I wanted it to be over. I was scared. I knew that the officer had been shot, and I was remorseful about that." But she had no idea what had happened to the gunman, Matthaeus Jaehnig, whom she had last seen alive when she surrendered to police. There was a point in time before Matthaeus had shot himself. "I was afraid of the retaliation he would take against me. Not only was I afraid of him, but I was afraid of the police too. 'Cause they had threatened me, kept on threatening me that I was going to go down for murder. I was going to go down for murder and, at the time, I was afraid. But I thought they can't do that to me because I didn't do anything." It never occurred to her to request an attorney. Gosh, I wish I would have. It's so silly to say this now, but as I look back, I see that I was sitting there, and I don't think I thought it was as serious as it was. I thought I was going to be able to go home. Tears well in her eyes and spill onto her cheeks. She shudders and wipes her face with her hands. "I didn't know I was going to be charged with murder." When a police officer is killed in the line of duty, the response is enormous. Emotions run high. "There was a lot of guilt among those officers," said Denver Deputy District Attorney Tim Twining. "They experienced it could have been me, should have been me, kind of thoughts. Those are conversations I had with those officers." Law. Enforcement agencies in Denver, Jefferson County, Arapahoe County, Castle Rock, and Lakewood were among those cooperating in the sprawling investigation. Resources from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation were tapped, and efforts continued around the clock. Critical information in the case emerged from the 3 hours of police interviews with Auman that night. The expert questioning and her alternately naive and concocted responses became the foundation for the prosecution's case against her. Auman's words, her description of the day's events, would haunt her. It was 4:50 p.m., November the 12th, 1997, inside the Denver Police Department's interview room. Auman sat across the table from Detective John Priest. Detective Kelly O'Hare and Denver Chief Deputy District Attorney Lamar Sims were also in the room. The video camera was rolling. "I want you to understand my situation," said Auman, drinking from a paper cup. "I would have pulled over if it was me. I wouldn't have shot anybody. I just wanted to give up." Auman had been read her rights. She had waived her right to an attorney. The videotape continues. The priest asks how she knew Matthaeus. Jaehnig. "I know this person who knows him." She fidgets and looks at her hands. She said a friend named Dave sent a Jaehnig to help her move from Buffalo Creek. Auman planned to live in Denver with a high school friend, Demetria Soriano. The officer asked if she knew Dave well. "We're close, yeah. He's like my big brother. He looks out for me." Priest wanted to know his last name. "I'd like to tell you," she said, "but I'm afraid for my life." "You couldn't be safer anywhere in the world than you are right now," Priest said. Auman paused. "It's Vargas." "So you wanted someone there for some muscle for you?" Priest suggested. The interview continued. She told the officers she didn't know Soriano's last name, although they'd been friends since high school. She offered a description of the fictitious Dave, complete with tattoos. She made up a fake last name for her former boyfriend, Sean Cheever. She said his room was unlocked when they arrived at the lodge and the door was open. She described Jaehnig's red Trans Am as a Firebird. I think it was green. "I sure don't want to catch you in a lie," Priest said. "I'm not lying," Auman replied. "I'm not a liar. I might have told you some things before because I was afraid for my life." Her eyes glanced from the table to the officer. "We're not just here to talk about what happened," Priest said. "We're here to help as best we can with any problems you might be involved in. I just wish I'd never gotten involved with these people," Auman said. The interview had been underway for nearly 2 hours. Auman was biting her fingers and shaking her head. "It's not a good day," she said. "2 people that I don't even know are dead because of me." "Why is that?" said Priest, drawing more detail from her in this critical area of criminal responsibility. "Just because I wanted a little muscle to back me up when I wanted to get my stuff," she said. She'd used the very word Priest had suggested earlier. Prosecutors later would use this to show she knew her companions had violence in mind that day. She started to cry. "Lisl, we're not trying to say you're a bad person," said O'Hare. "I'm not a bad person," she said. "We're not out to hurt you," O'Hare added. "I know you didn't intend for this to happen today, but some things got set in motion. This is a big-time thing." "I'm just scared as hell now," Auman said. The interview ended at 6:43 p.m. Denver District Attorney Bill Ritter had been watching through a two-way mirror. He already had enough to prosecute. One by one, the other suspects were identified. Soriano was arrested at her parents' home in Highlands Ranch. Her boyfriend, Dion Gersey, called from the Super 8 motel in Castle Rock saying he wanted to turn himself in. A warrant was issued for Jaehnig's friend Stephen Dupre, who was hiding in the basement of a friend's house on South Federal Boulevard. The mysterious tattooed Dave Vargas didn't exist. Denver police evidence teams worked in the dark at the crime scene, videotaping bloodstains, bullet holes, spent shells, and the body of Jaehnig sprawled on the concrete with the murder weapon at his feet, the suicide weapon at his side. Blood trailed from his head. Denver police officer Nick Rogers interviewed Cheever about the burglary from his room at the Hudson Hotel in Buffalo Creek. "I locked my room when I decided to tell her to get lost," he wrote in the statement to police. On November 12th, "I had nothing in my room that belonged to her." At her home in Littleton, Colleen Auerbach talked to Denver police by phone. Her daughter, Lisl, was in custody, they explained. "Tell her just to tell the truth," Auerbach said. "Tell her that her mother says to tell the truth." At 11:25 p.m., the video camera began taping Auman's second police interview. Once again, Ritter was watching through the two-way mirror. Auman was crying, and no defense attorney was present. "Are you okay?" asked Priest. "I guess so," she answered, sniffling. Priest handed her some tissues. "Thank you," she said. Priest asked Auman to explain what had happened. "Sean lied to me and made me feel like she said. "I wanted to retaliate, I guess." She identified Soriano and Cheever. She explained that Soriano's friends had offered to help her move. She continued to use the fake names of John and Dan for Gers and Dupre, and said the only name she knew for Jaehnig was a nickname, Sardine. "I wanted my stuff back," she said. At this point, I didn't realize that whatever of my stuff I got back, I was going to have to split with them, and I didn't realize they were going to take stuff that did not belong to me. Auman said they planned to go to the Hudson Hotel to pick up her belongings during the day while Cheever was at work because there would be less conflict, I guess. She talked to John about Cheever. I said, "Take it easy on him," and he said, "I'll do the best I can." I said, "Don't kill him." This was just the kind of testimony the prosecution needed. They were building a case that violence was expected. Priest kept prodding. Auman said they all talked the night before about moving her things to Denver, and I opened my big mouth, and I told them he had a couple of big speakers. She was implicating herself in a conspiracy to commit burglary. Priest kept her talking. She explained that at the lodge, John, Dan, and Auman were in Cheever's room. "You knew they were taking things that didn't belong to you?" asked Priest. "Right," Auman said. In another interview room at Denver Police Headquarters, Detective Alex Woods was questioning Soriano. She said she and Auman had enlisted the help of 3 guys to drive to the mountains and get some property that belonged to Auman. She identified the guys as Tao, Matthaeus Jaehnig, John, and Dan. She admitted that they had taken things that belonged to Cheever and told the detective they also wanted to scare Cheever. In the middle of the interview, Woods was notified that detectives interviewing Soriano's parents had learned her boyfriend, Dion Gersey, had been along on the trip to Buffalo Creek. At that point, Soriano requested an attorney. The interview abruptly ended. At 6:15 p.m. on November 12th, a Denver police officer filed a statement about the homicide, which included the following. "I ran over to him, Officer Mark Bennett, as he was ordering a white female, unidentified, to exit the hallway of the building and lay 6 on the ground. As she was removed by myself and Officer Bruce VanderJagt and, I believe, Officer Tony Martinez, my partner, yelled that the suspect could have access to the other side of the building. I then ran around the north side of this same building and observed no footprints in the rear and no obvious access to this courtyard area." At 6:45 p.m. on November 12th, another police report was filed on the arrest of Auman. As I started towards the apartments, I observed a male attempting to force entry into the southernmost apartment with a female standing in front of him watching the parking lot. I began to yell for them to get their hands in the air. When I started crying, the female turned around and put her hands in the air while the male ducked down and began to run northbound behind a plywood-type hallway. I continued to yell for the female to get to her knees, and she began to go to her knees when I grabbed her and started to pull her to the ground. I passed the female to Officer VanderJagt, who took control of her and eventually handcuffed her with Officer Brake. After realizing there was no way for the party, Jaehnig, to escape, I went to the southeast corner. Signed, Mark Bennett. Brake and Bennett revised their statements 2 days later, filing additional police reports and supplemental videotaped interviews. The officers, who were partners at the District 3 substation, said they had not discussed the arrest or their earlier reports. They said it was a coincidence that they remembered additional details on the same day, 2 days after the shooting. Brake now said that as Auman emerged from the hallway to surrender to police, I observed her lean to her right as if to drop something, then stand back up with no weapon in her hands. We weren't sure what she was setting down, or if she was setting anything down. It appeared like she would set something down or reach for something. Bennett told the detective, demonstrating the same movements Brake had performed on the tape. She did this, a slight movement. I thought she was setting something down. I didn't know what was there. Bennett said otherwise. His report of November 12th was complete. I put everything in there, but seeing the female dip, I came in today to add that. The dip implied that Auman handed the murder weapon to Jaehnig. It supported the prosecution's contention that she actively assisted in the murder of VanderJagt. Officer Michael Gargaro also amended his statement 2 days after the shooting, changing the way he characterized Auman's behavior after her arrest. In a videotaped interview on the day of the murder, Gargaro, who had handcuffed Auman and drove her to police headquarters, described her as frightened and compassionate. On the way to headquarters, he said, "The suspect asked me if I knew the officer who had been killed. I told her that I did. I told her he had a child, was a wonderful guy, and didn't deserve what happened. I wanted to know if she would cooperate and help me out. She said, 'I don't know anything. I just met him today. I'm sorry for your friend. I'm sorry that happened. I didn't mean for anything bad like this to happen.'" In his amended report 2 days later, he characterized Auman as unfeeling and uncommunicative. Sergeant Calvin Hemphill walked up to my police unit and began to ask the female suspect who the other person is, Gargaro wrote. The female suspect stated all she knew was sardine. Sergeant Hemphill became angry. The female continued to be uncooperative, stating, "I just don't know anything." At this time, gunfire erupted. Within moments, officers announced that an officer was down. I advised the female of this situation. No emotion. Auman's lawyers later would say the prosecution team inspired and orchestrated the revised reports to help their case. Prosecutors said they believed the officers were adding additional information to their reports to be conscientious, but they also said the changes were spontaneous. Defense attorneys challenged the truthfulness of another key prosecution witness even before Auman's trial began. Cheever, the alleged burglary victim, was arrested on November 21, 1997, and accused of theft, forgery, criminal impersonation, and drug possession. When officers searched the hotel room where he had been staying, they reported finding marijuana, 4 stolen purses, and 3 checkbooks, including one in the name of Lisl Auman. 9 days earlier, Cheever told police that nothing belonging to Auman was in his room. By that time, Auman had also produced canceled checks to show she'd purchased the video recorder and snowboard she was accused of stealing from Cheever. The case sped forward. On November 28, 16 days after the VanderJagt shooting, Stephen Dupre was arrested outside a South Federal house. He was charged with illegal possession of a semi-automatic handgun, possession of a controlled substance, burglary, and parole violation. Meanwhile, several reports were filed from the crime labs. Pathologist Thomas Henry stated that a drug screen found 772 nanograms of methamphetamine per milliliter of Jaahnig's blood. Any level over 500 nanograms per milliliter is considered significant. In most people, 772 nanograms would be regarded as a toxic, potentially lethal dose. And in what would become a critical element to impeach Brake and Bennett's statements implying that Auman handled the murder weapon, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation reported its analysis failed to reveal the presence of gunshot primer residue on any samples from Auman's body or clothing, and that Auman's fingerprints were not found on the murder weapon. The officers stood by their story. Tim Twining and Henry Cooper, the deputy district attorneys handling the prosecution, said it was clear from the start that Auman was guilty. The interviews with Auman and Soriano tipped them off.